John, we're back.
We are back,
How you doing?
well fed from Thanksgiving.
Ugh, can you believe 2024 is winding down?
Prefer not to think about it.
Whoever thought we'd get to 2025?
Who thought we'd still be podcasting?
I had somebody tell me that somebody referred to the year 2100. People are talking about it already.
So I had a moment of, oh crap, recently on that point where I realized that if my son lives to his grandmother's current age, he will see the year 2100.
Oh my God. Thank God I'll be dead.
Oh, the world will be over.
Indeed.
All right. On that
Indeed.
cheery note,
On
let's
that
dive in.
on that promising note, let's talk about something a little more interesting. So, the holiday shopping season is now in swing. We just had Black
Mhm.
Friday and Cyber Monday, and everybody's getting ready for the holidays. So, I thought it would be fun to talk about a project you and I actually just worked on
Yes, sir.
that enabled us to really dig into some holiday trends and holiday shopping trends, and we get to really look at the full scope of how people are shopping and buying things during the holiday season and into what people have bought the last few years, and hopefully can help brands predict what people are going to buy moving forward.
Yeah.
So
And we should say that this was based on a client that has access to billions of actual shopper data points. So really a fascinating ability to dig into where people are spending their money.
yeah, totally. One of the stats we came across from a different source, Adobe, was actually predicting that this year will be the biggest holiday shopping season ever, and predicting that consumers would spend $240 billion.
Billion with a B.
Yeah,
That's,
online.
Brian, I'm no math major, but that's almost a quarter trillion.
Maybe you should have been, John.
Maybe I should have been. I did that pretty quickly,
Yeah.
didn't I? Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into some of these nuggets before we talk to a really interesting guest. So one of the things that really jumped out to us as we were kind of going through the data and coming up with some ideas of how to present some of these insights. And specifically, we were really looking at shopping trends through Amazon, Walmart, and Target, the big
Yep.
retailers,
Yep.
and what some of these consumers do, not just people that buy products there, what else are they doing? One of the interesting things we really came across, which I think is a kind of a major alert for CPG brands, is the private label brands that Amazon, Target, and Walmart
Mhm.
are selling to consumers. The volume that they're actually selling and taking away from potential CPG brands. So home goods, which is a category of durable items at home, things like furnishings and beddings and different things you might have in your house. John, what would you guess would be the percentage of total items purchased on these private label brands against all home goods?
Yeah, well, I would have guessed lower than what it actually is because I do know that because we had that data, it's 36%. But I would not have guessed that because if I'm thinking about going into a store like a Walmart or a Target and looking to buy sheets or something or pillows, it wouldn't dawn on me that there's a really good chance the thing I'm going to buy is their brand, their store brand.
Yeah, they've done a really good job of presenting these products like,
Masterful.
yeah,
I
and
bet most people don't even know that you're buying a store brand, like because they've branded them all. They've got so many different names on these things.
so many different names and packaged in a way that you just have absolutely no idea. And they've done a good job of it. And the products are usually good. They've
Oh
made them
yeah.
better. So, if you have a product and you're bringing it into one of the big box stores, know that you're fighting against them as much as other competition. So they're
Yeah,
creating their own products to beat you on their shelves, which is already an uphill battle. So
totally. So that's the durable items. Rip through the next three categories where store brands
yeah.
are dominating.
So the other domination areas we were seeing, or at least where they're getting a lot of play, are home essentials, which is more around cleaning products and other consumable items. So the home essentials was 25% were private label brands, food is 24%, and apparel is 21%. So that's a pretty good chunk of sales with these private label brands. So we really found that fascinating and the growing trend there.
Yeah. The aforementioned son might be able to go to college only because most of his clothes were from Target by Target brands back in the day. Yeah, so here's a quick question for you, Brian. Knowing that so many food items, almost a quarter of the food purchases are store brands, do you have a favorite white labeled food product? Who does a good
Who
store
does a
brand
good
food
store?
product?
I have I actually really like store brand pretzels, which I never thought I'd like.
Oh, look at
I've seen
that.
a good salt to pretzel ratio, so I'm a fan of the store brand pretzels. And if you can get that right, I feel like you can get anything right.
Interesting.
That's my litmus test, you
It's a good
know?
litmus test. This could be a whole podcast, by the way. There is a fascinating ecosystem around recreating branded food products and making them be pretty much the same
Yes.
formulation.
Oh, absolutely. And real fast, one other thing for other shoppers out there, with it being the holiday season, Aldi has a better holiday pretzel than they do the rest of the year.
What
The
the
store brand pretzel, and it's a fascinating pretzel. I don't know why they don't just sell it as the pretzel throughout the year, but it's a better pretzel. So go out and get your pretzels while you can because they
wow.
fly off the shelves.
Brought to you
I
by
just bought I
Aldi.
just bought four bags the other day.
How about that? I never would have thought of this, but I've been looking for a reason to go to Aldi. You just gave me one.
There you
All right, my answer, by the way, would be pretty much the entire lineup of Trader Joe's cookies. I don't
go.
think they miss a beat on those. All right, so the
Nice.
other big nugget that I think jumped out to us is this idea of how differently retailers perform during big promotional season. So the one thing, the real obvious thing we noticed was that looking at day by day purchases across those power three of Amazon, Target, and Walmart, Amazon's done an amazing job creating its own holiday with Prime Days. Like,
Yeah.
wow. It's covered in the news, right? You see it?
Yeah, yeah, and other brands are trying to trail onto their own the holiday that Amazon created. So, they had a fall Prime Day, which is
Yep.
in
Added a
the
second
news
one.
almost, and they're almost trying to just create their a new Black Friday for themselves.
Yeah. So what that did is Prime Days since 2021 have represented a 37% increase over kind of the average rest of this shopping year days.
Wow.
So really big jump on those Prime Days. And then I don't know about you, but I was surprised to learn that that didn't do a damn thing in terms of cannibalizing Walmart or Target on those days.
Wasn't even a dent.
Yeah. No, they still sell as much as they always do, which, P.S., is more, a lot more, as big a juggernaut as Amazon has become and appears to be. Walmart and Target still sell more every day.
Yeah, that's an interesting nugget that we were able to pull out of that.
Now Prime Day did close the gap a little bit. So their average cart value was like 49.40 $49.40 average cart value on Prime Day. That's really close to what Target spent sells on average, which is an average cart of $50. And Walmart average cart value is 69.22. So, they're still moving plenty of merch even on Prime Day.
Yeah, and as Amazon continues to try to get deeper into the food market. It'll be interesting to watch some of that because they're really expanding their food into the app, but also all this, their own brick and mortar stores and
Yeah.
everything.
Oh,
So
yeah. Big, good point. Yeah. Amazon's doing a great job moving electronics during the holidays. So that was the other thing that jumped out. They sell almost three times as many electronics items. So that's one area where, even though their total cart size is smaller, they're doing really well on electronics. And then as, no surprise, Walmart's really dominating food. And we saw a pretty cool nugget that last year Target crushed apparel.
was that all for you buying stuff for your son?
No, he's out of the store brand Target apparel or any apparel purchase at Target. I'm sure that's somehow not
It's not cool anymore.
probably not cool enough for him.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good stuff. Why don't we get into our interesting guest we have here? I
Yes.
love this topic.
Yeah, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Joel Beckerman. He's an award-winning composer, producer, arranger, and author even, and he's the founder of Made Music Studio, which is a strategic music and sound studio in New York City. Joel and his team have created original scores for more than 50 TV series and specials, including Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations, CBS Evening News, CBS This Morning, Entertainment Tonight, ESPN's 30 for 30, and even the Super Bowl on NBC. Along the way, Joel has collaborated with talent that ranges from John Legend to Morgan Freeman to OK Go and will.i.am, and even, I would argue, the greatest film composer of our time, John Williams. But you know us, Brian, we're going to bring it back to marketing, right?
Let's do it.
That's because Joel's Made Music Studio is also at the top of the sonic branding field. Now, Brian, coming into this conversation with Joel, were you very aware of kind of like the idea of sonic branding as a big part of the branding toolkit?
I was not. I mean, you kind of know it's there, but don't really know it's there.
Yeah, we take
You
it for
know,
granted. Like, I mean, most brands do something, but
yeah.
and some of them are really consistent over years. But man, it's not something that was like top of mind. But it is for Joel, and his work can be found in really signature sonic identities for some global giants, including AT&T, IMAX, Hulu, and Disney. In 2015, Joel even wrote a book, The Sonic Boom: How Sound Transforms the Way We Think, Feel, and Buy, which espouses what he calls sonic humanism, the power of sound to make our lives better and simpler. And Brian, who doesn't want their life to be better and simpler?
Amen.
All right. Well, Joel, welcome to Snap Decisions. We are thrilled to have you here. What an honor. Your career is so distinguished and what you do is so distinct that we are excited to talk to you. Thanks again for making time.
Well, thank you, John and Brian. This is super, super fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
So let's get started with maybe you explaining to our listeners a little bit about what sonic branding is and what your company does. We'd love to hear along the way some of the examples of the types of assignments that you and Made Music Studio takes on.
Well, let me just kind of zoom back for a second because we approach this really as like more like from a human perspective, first and foremost. So I wrote a book called The Sonic Boom, which is basically about the role of sound in your life. So whether or not you realize it, every single moment of your life is scored by music and sound, and it's always there. It's guiding your choices, it's changing your mood in an instant. And, we don't need to be taught this stuff. We're wired for it. And, there's really a direct connection, not just in brands, but also just overall in experiences that if you love a sound, the sound in an experience, you're 86% more likely to want to have that experience again. And the inverse is true, where if you have a really bad audio experience in association with something, you're 86% likely to not want to have that experience ever again. So
Mm,
really kind of come from the human standpoint. It's like, okay, how can we bring those truths that we have in terms of human experience to the work of building brands? We think of sonic branding kind of through this broad lens, like the strategic use of music and sound
mm.
to build brands. I think a lot of times people get very focused on sonic logos, which is one of the things we do. So let me talk about what sonic logos are, if that's okay. If
Yeah,
that's
please do. A lot of what we do here is we try to make kind of marketing topics more accessible to people who might not be marketers, but have an interest in the way brands position themselves. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I mean, everyone knows like McDonald's, but right,
Yep.
they've been hammering that in the nicest way for I don't know what 25, 30 years, and they've been super consistent about it, which makes it an enormously valuable brand asset for them. And it shows up everywhere. Generally in advertising, whether it's radio or television. I think it now shows up in some of their social content. So a lot of times would people would think about, okay, well that's really kind of a mnemonic for them. It's you could call it a jingle. It's in that it's a short version of of the theme. A lot of times people would consider it a mnemonic as well, or like Intel Inside. You've heard
Yeah.
that a million times.
Classic.
Now there are Liberty Insurance, Liberty, Liberty, Liberty. So I don't necessarily think of that as a jingle. I think of it more as like a sonic logo. So we did, for instance, the sonic logo for AT&T, which they've been using everywhere, for what, 9 years now. And what's kind of interesting is the formulation of these things. It's great at the end of advertising. It's great, hearing the sound against a visual, and it reinforces the visual, reinforces the sound, which reinforces the visual. So now you have a multi-sensory experience, which we all know just from research and just our own human experience makes things that much more sticky. Sonic logos also, I call it the ham sandwich factor. Like if you're in the kitchen and you're making a ham sandwich, you're not even looking at the TV and you hear that Sonic logo, it's like, oh, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, you might all of a sudden,
Yeah.
want to have McDonald's, get in the car
Yeah.
and drive out to McDonald's. So that's kind of the basics of a Sonic logo. What's super interesting, even though it has all of this research behind it about how valuable it is to the brand and to brand building, it's amazing how many brands have not yet taken advantage of that as a tool in the toolbox. And the flip side is that there are some great examples, things that, super successful. And then there are a lot of things which it's like, oh, Sonic logos, let's check the box. So
Yeah.
generally, what I say to people is you need to put the same level of rigor and the same level of emotional, what's the emotional connection like that you do into a visual identity. So
Hmm.
if you're just kind of like doing something that's more executional for a spot or whatever, it is kind of checking a box. And in general, our experiences, those things don't last more than 13 weeks because they're not really centered in the brand. They're centered in what a particular ad campaign needs.
I like the comparison to, the amount of energy and investment and research and thought you'd put into doing a visual identity, because certainly brands can spend a lot of money and time there. I'm just curious, when you're doing, let's limit it to the idea of a Sonic logo, like the examples you just provided. How many options are you likely to be generating in the process, and how many are you likely to show a client? Just real quick, curious to know, like, what's the process look like?
Okay, so it's a
Yeah,
scary.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Talk about a ham sandwich.
Yeah, yeah. Brian and I always like to imagine what was it like to be in the room and things get pitched, and how much did we see versus how much you created in the first place to get there.
So I'll just like the dirty little secret is if we're producing less, it means that we did a really good job up front in terms of we do these sonic mood board sessions, which are very much
Hmm.
like picking colors out of a color, color swatch book or there's a lot of other sort of things we do in marketing that are very intuitive. So we'll talk about the brand, we'll get a brand brief, we'll give people, I mean, almost invariably people are coming to us and saying, look, we're in the middle of a brand transformation. What can sound do to help us with this? So if we do a good job with these listening sessions, sonic mood board sessions, we're taking all that information in and we're playing examples of things out in the world and saying, okay, well, how does that make you feel? It's like you don't need to be able to, you don't need to play guitar, or you don't need to like, know every, Led Zeppelin song to be able to do this. It really has to do with how does it make you feel.
That's
So
great. That's great. Simple criteria. Stop thinking so hard. How you feel.
totally, because we're all consumers as well, right? Even and it's easy. Actually, it's easier in a lot of ways to take a half a step back from your brand in music and sound than it is if you're doing a visual identity. So in general, people say, like, oh my God, this is like the most fun meeting I've ever had in my life because it's really just about listening and sort of talking about it and the emotional component of it. So if we do a good job on that, now we have really a common language. We've developed a language that, you have the brand language and you have the music and sound language. So now we can go back and kind of, bring all the alchemy to it. And usually, I mean, let's just be honest, this is an iterative process. So
Sure.
sometimes we might create 8 or 10 and it's like, oh yeah, we kicked it, this is great, let's just show it to the clients for a first round. Sometimes we might create 40 things before we're happy, before we feel like we've captured something. And again, people are really focused on the sonic logos, which is what shows up at the end of the advertising. However, if you're doing it right, you're creating something that can show up in any touch point. So we did something for the Pillsbury Doughboy. So you got the laugh, and now there's a Sonic logo that just came out recently, and it showed up, in the middle of the stadium in a little break between, between innings of a baseball game. It's like, okay, that's how they're supposed to use it. So really what gets you to that point of coming to something iconic, because in that specific example, there's an underscore, which is a theme. So if you think about a theme from a movie or a theme from a television show, it gives you kind of a sense of the story. So if we're doing the theme, we're doing that, and the Sonic logo becomes part of that, then hopefully that helps us get a handle on it and helps clients get a handle on it. We should always be listening to the Sonic logos in isolation, but if we have the story, the musical story that's attached to it, it just becomes that much more resonant and much more a sense of, we're trying to create music and sound that's iconic and that's enduring, that's going to be around a really long time, not just something that's going to show up for. So it's a long process, but when you get it, when you nail it, it's super fun and it's super exciting.
The best processes I've seen are when, it's difficult because a client agency relationship will be like, I'm hiring this agency. I want to see something that's complete. But at the same time, it's like, you try to put something in a state where people can react to, and it might not be fully complete, but if you can get the right feedback, you don't necessarily have like wasted all the time on creating something that's what you would consider complete, because that they're going to have feedback. But at the same time, they want to see something fully finished. So there's definitely a dance there. And when you get it right, it's great.
Yeah. So you mean that mood stage, Brian, where it's kind
Yeah.
of like, are you getting the right feel?
And, and also like, maybe needs a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that or whatever. So do you find, Joel, that brands, are you educating them on how they can use these things? Do they even know how to fully use these things?
There are some marketers that have like, really, really deep experience in this, but the vast majority of people don't yet. It's still a relatively, new part of the branding arsenal. But like, I talked about doing something in a break in a, screen in a stadium, but there's a million other places things can show up in, like corporate meetings and, devices. There's a lot of things. It's inspired by, it's again like a common language what you're trying to come up with, because it's about personality. It's really about expressing the personality in all the places that the brand shows up.
So we're curious to hear about the range of projects. I know you've mentioned Sonic logos, and early on, it sounded like that was just kind of like the tip of the iceberg for you. And you've just mentioned doing device sounds and car sounds. Like, what's the spectrum of audio work that you do on behalf of brands?
Well, that's like why this is insanely fun, because every time you turn around, there's a new opportunity and something can do. So we're actually working on a flagship retail project right now, which didn't open or hasn't opened yet, which I can't talk about, but I'll talk about one that I can. So we did really soundscapes for the flagship retail store for T in Chicago. So it's really, we're thinking about it's like scoring your experience through the whole store.
Hmm.
So if you walk in, when you think about like Chicago, there's all this kind of crazy noise and energy and stuff coming in off the street. We wanted to get people to like just change their mood for a moment. And we wanted to do something a little bit whimsical. So we came up with this idea of doing like a sonic Rube Goldberg machine. So you have, when you walk in, you have all these sort of, you have a mood that kind of grabs your attention. It's like all of a sudden you're seeing things. We wanted people to stop in the vestibule. So you're not just going and getting like a phone case, but you're like, oh, and you're looking across the store and you might
Wow.
see different, because it slows you down, it stops you. We're able to affect people's behavior with this. And then the Rube Goldberg machine came in with sort of all these little surprises. It's like you hear, a ball coming down a xylophone, or you hear like little moments of fireworks or whatever it is. So it's like it grabs your attention. You want to stay in the vestibule for a second. And the biggest problem we had with it really is the kids don't want to leave the vestibule. They don't want to go into the store. So, but that's a good problem to have. So,
But you're kind of helping navigate people through a retail environment by keying them with sound.
yes, and also in scoring their experiences in different parts of the store, we actually can slow down people's shopping behavior, which actually increases cash register. So there's a lot of, it's emotional, it's brand centered, it's also very much human behavior centered. And there's like a ton of research and associated with this. Like we'll do implicit association testing, which is subconscious research that shows people like, basically by the choices that they make when they're under time pressure, we know that they're getting to a subconscious response. And that helps us actually guide the direction of the work. But, other examples, if you think about, theme parks, okay, it, might be super obvious, but there is a little band in the Star Wars experience in the theme parks where we created this song for a band with aliens that play through a little window and all this kind of stuff. But now that song shows up in the retail environments. So it's like there's something that's familiar, the voice is familiar or whatever. And it's like, oh, I just saw that, or, whatever. It just, again, ties those experiences together. And, people have a little smile on their face, which doesn't hurt when you're trying to, sell merch. So it really shows up in a million different places. Products are probably one of the most fun places.
Are you a lot of times kind of starting with like a starter kit of like, a couple tracks that they can use in like a commercial, or like you said, on a website or in an app, and then they come back to you to kind of expand on those things for different things? Because, you know, like a logo, there's different cuts or images and stuff, but I could, you know, music has to fit, right? So like, is it, you know, every time they have something new, they're coming back to you to kind of make a different version of the same thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean it is different. It's different for every single client. You know, a lot of times people come in, it's like, okay, my biggest need is product, or my biggest need is retail, or my biggest need is, you know, the end of advertising or the beginning of advertising. So a lot of times we'll start from those places and then develop toolkits based on where people imagine their sonic identity is going to go. And again, we show people all the different possibilities in their brand, and they're like, oh, well, let's have it for that and for that.
Mm.
What we've realized, you know, over the years and really just kind of dug into recently is what you were talking about, we know, which especially, you know, having to do with social, we know that, you know what, there's probably 100 or 1,000 times as much content that brands need to create or agents need to create that they
Sure.
used to than they used to. So we know that there's going to be that many thousands more pieces of music where the sonic identity shows up. So we developed this product called Continuum, which has, you know, thousands and thousands of tracks, which actually we then kind of cull down to specifically the tracks that work for a particular brand. And then we'll kind of give them tools and instructions about how to put their sonic identity pretty much on any piece of music that they utilize for the brand. So, you know, we've been trying to scale this idea because more so than any time we've ever been doing this, you know, again, there are just thousands and thousands of executions. As you guys well know, you know, it's a huge multiple, right?
And I'm guessing that service you just talked about, where you're trying to scale a core set of sounds across a bunch of different marketing channels. Imagine with some franchise brands, you're talking about many, many different types of people and creative teams playing around with that service.
Yeah, and you know that's it's actually kind of like part of what we're doing is to try to gamify it and just make it super fun to use, just like make it almost like a toy.
So like a
And
knucklehead like me could go into a brand sound kit and
oh,
and
well,
and create some sounds or use sounds into a social post.
yeah, I mean you
Oh
absolutely.
God.
And again,
It just says, "Oh God."
It's amazing and terrifying to hear of this.
so you know there are guardrails, right? You can't just
Okay,
do anything. But
now you made Brian feel better.
oh, okay, okay, you
Phew.
know, and all probably all the brand managers out there too made us feel more comfortable. But I think the idea is to give people a limited but very expansive and fun toolkit. Again, a lot of it is library music, but match it up against the owned assets or use the owned assets sometimes on different projects.
That's
Cool.
great. I love the work that you guys have done with Corona specifically. Like when I watched and listened, I mean, you really feel like Corona when you're interacting with that, and the Burger King work that you've done as well, which seems to be pretty significant in terms of, you know, building sonic branding with visual branding. I mean, that seems like a client that really was lockstep with, you know, building to everything that you guys can do.
You know, it's I'm really glad you pointed out both of those because they're amongst our favorite projects. The Corona thing was super interesting because you don't always do this now. It's partly just because of where we are culturally with music and sound, but we had a band in the room and everyone was just jamming. And from that jam, we're like, oh, this is cool. This is cool. So it became, again, sort of an iterative thing. And it ended up like we were like, well, this melody, and at the end, there was just like one cool chord that got played. And it's like, oh, that became, oh, now I'm
Mm.
on the beach. Now, and this is own. So I'm glad you pointed that one out. It's won a lot of awards and it's actually one of our favorite things. The Burger King work you're talking about is international. So it's pretty much everything ex-US. And it's kind of like if you think about it almost from anyway, hopefully people will YouTube these things and find them. But
We'll
we
share
did,
links.
yeah. Oh, good. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
There was another one that again, just kind of an interesting solution we did for Cinnamon Toast Crunch, where they had this kind of idea about, you know, owning this word that they made up called Cinnadust. So, you know, cinnamon, and it could be on a lot of different things. So we're like, you know, they're like, yeah, we want to have a mnemonic for this thing we're calling Cinnadust. So it's like, well, nobody knows the word, so we have to say the word in the logo. And we were messing around with a whole bunch of different things, and it's supposed to be irreverent. So, again, it's like you end up a lot of times kind of going down really blind alleys, and we
Yeah.
went down a ton of blind alleys in that. And one of the guys is like, "Wait a minute," and he just came like he was on the way to, like, he was going to go to a stadium to a game, and he's like, "Wait a minute," and he pulled out like one of those handheld air horns, and so
Yeah.
we just recorded the air horn, said the word Cinedust in a really interesting way. And there were like little chords, chords that fit it and were associated. And we're just cracking ourselves up. We didn't even know if it was going to
Love
be
that.
funny to anybody else.
It sounds like a really fun place to work.
Yeah.
It is, except the times when we're trying to come up with the idea and it's not coming, and then you're banging your head against the wall. So I think probably everybody's familiar with that. But yeah, it's
So do you have
um,
musicians wandering around your studio every day? Is it just a
every day, like pretty much everybody. There's a guy who's even a business development guy here who is a kick-ass composer. So like a lot of times, I mean, he's worked on a lot of our jobs. Just like, well, wait a minute, I'm gonna not sell for a minute. I'm gonna go into the studio and record, something. So yeah, it's very much like it's, I want to say like a playground, but sometimes it's more like a playpen. So yeah, you're kind of encouraged to just do stupid stuff and see what sticks.
Do you guys find yourselves like constantly like pulling out your phone and recording something really fast, like on the go, or do you wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh my God, I got something in my head, I got to get it out, I got to record it? Like we do
Yeah.
that with writing and stuff, and God knows what we actually were thinking at the time, but
yeah.
Yeah, for me personally, I can't talk about everyone else's process, but for me, I do it all the time. It's like I wake up and it's like, oh, I got to do this thing, and my wife gets pissed off because I'm waking her up or whatever. I'm doing this little
you're
thing.
making sounds.
Yeah, and then I put the
Yeah,
phone
just write
away,
it.
and like 9 times out of 10 in the morning, I listen to it. It's like, oh, this is crap. But then there's one
One.
time every out of 10
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Most of
Uh,
those 2 a.m. ideas are bad, but it's
yeah,
good when you get a good one.
and
You don't if you hadn't put it down, you would have been like, I missed the one thing that
Right.
was
I
gold.
know,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
The other project that I wanted to really ask you about was HBO, because HBO is such an iconic sound over the years, for decades of, just going through the history of HBO, it has that sound, and you were able to, bring new sound around that. And I really wanted to ask you about that process of like merging and integrating newer sound to an iconic sound and making sure that it fits and goes together and becomes more modern and tells the story. And I feel like you guys did a really great job on that, and I'm sure that's an interesting process.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. That's actually really fun to do and also very stressful
I'm sure.
because you got to
Yeah.
get it right.
Yeah.
People know and love that brand. And if you don't
Mhm.
get it right, man, you're going to get really, really bad social media posts.
Yep.
Mhm.
Luckily, we haven't had that yet. We've seen a couple of competitors who've really gotten blasted on that. There actually was a television show, I won't tell you which one, that took our work off the air and did an arrangement, a different version of it, and they just got completely blasted with tweets from their audience who's like, why did you change my thing that I really love? I wake up to it every day. So there's a lot of pressure. I did the same thing actually for the Super Bowl theme for NBC. So there was this piece that John Williams wrote that had been the theme for the Super Bowl and actually for NBC for quite some time, and it was really awesome, kind of like a march tempo orchestra thing, which was perfect at the time. And they wanted to evolve it and move it forward. And they said to John, okay, well, could you put some electronics and maybe some drum? He's like, okay, that's not my thing. But he and I had worked briefly on a project actually for the news division of NBC. So he said, well, why don't you give this guy a try? So he referred me to work on this. Of course, now I'm already petrified, you know,
I
that
was gonna say, stressful working with HBO logo, working with John Williams music. Oh my
Yeah, I
God.
mean, geez,
Yeah, don't
talk
screw
about
that
like
up.
being nervous. Jeez.
well,
Good Lord.
originally when I was given the assignment, I said, like, let me call up John Williams and just see if he has any guidance, suggestions, whatever. So I called up and I spoke to his agent for a minute and said, I'd love to get on the phone with you and John and we can have a conversation about this. And he said, let me call him, let me check it out. And he called me back. He said, "Oh, actually, John said you should just do what you think is right." It's like, no, no, no. Really, I want to get on the phone with him. No, no, no. He wants you to do what you think is right. And I knew also that he's a big football fan. So now I'm really screwed because I'm going to create this piece with no input and knowing that, it's possible that it can't be that the first time he hears this is on the air. So I finished all the mixes. NBC was really happy. I called up the agent. I said, let me send you the mixes. He said, wait a minute. Let me find out. And he spoke to John. He came, no, John just wants you to do what you think is right. So here we are. I know the first down that he's going to hear this is on the first downbeat of the Super Bowl. So of course I was freaking out. Called his agent after the Super Bowl. I said, well, what did he think? Because I think I called a week or two after. I didn't want to know, but I wanted to know. So I said, well, what did he think? He said, let me get back to you. It's like a typical thing, right? Let me get back to you.
Yeah, just twist in the wind for another.
Exactly. So twist in the wind for another 2 weeks until he gets back to me. And it's like, then he's on the phone. I'm like, my hands are shaking. He's like, oh, John really liked what you did. I'm like, oh. So anyway,
amen.
That's my brush with trying to take greatness and move it into the future.
Awesome.
But at least he had the right reaction.
Thank God. Otherwise, I think I would have curled into a ball into like fetal position.
John Williams throws you under the bus could change the trajectory of your career, I suppose.
Even if he just hates me, that could change the trajectory of my brain.
Yeah, you can't even continue work if that happens.
Yeah, they're still hiring at the bank, so maybe I can go there and like count cash or something. So lucky, but it's again these kind of situations where you're redoing a famous Sonic logo or theme. Again, there's a lot of pressure. It's also super fun to really kind of dive in and, it's already part of popular culture and you have to kind of be brave about it and realize that that's the job. Like really, I mean, I know you guys do that with visual content all the time. And I'm sure brand managers and marketers who are listening have probably done that a lot of time too. It's exciting and terrifying.
Joe, I'd like to connect a couple things. You started talking about the human element, right? The things that make us feel and just kind of experience things differently. What stands out in terms of a brand sound or soundscape or sonic logo, anything that was really effective in shifting consumer perceptions about a brand?
It's such a great question. And there's so many dimensions of that because it could be cultural. It could be, now you have a brand that's connected to culture. Now you have a brand that's, much more you hear like the brand evolution. I would say probably one of the most interesting ones was, Nationwide. It's like, have like old school Nationwide is on your side, which you think is kind of boring. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to use that. But there were some smart advertisers out there who said, wait a minute, there's like all this equity. How do we bring that forward? So, you had, all these people in ads going like in different ways, electronics and all sorts of different ways that it could be reinvented, but sort of tongue in cheek. Like I thought that was super successful again because they were carrying the equity forward, but really doing it in a way that was kind of self-effacing. You were talking a little bit again about kind of going back to human experience. There's one thing I mentioned in the book called which I call sonic humanism. It's the idea of using music and sound to make people's lives richer and simpler, and a lot of that doesn't have to do specifically with marketing. But again, it's the same principles. So we've used music and sound principles, for instance, for hospital rooms. So in hospitals, one of the biggest problems is what they call alarm fatigue. So there are alarms that are going off in hospital rooms for like every device and for things that are super minor, but they're blaring and they're not blaring to help patient experience. They're blaring so that the manufacturers don't get sued to make sure that it's grabbing the attention of the caregivers. So one of the things we're really trying to do is use some of the principles of music and sound to make, to sort of calm people in those experiences. Even if you just have a very simple biophilic idea, like sound from nature, like, a wave, like a sound, like an ocean wave, but you have to pick exactly the right kind of wave. There are ones that can be very sort of irritating. There are ones that could be scary. Ones can grab your attention. I think a lot of times in these experiences, especially in alarm fatigue, it's we want music and sound that people don't even know that it's there unless you turn it off. So it just becomes part of the landscape that you're in. So this idea of improving people's lives in these kinds of experiences, I'm really, really interested in that. There's another thing we've done with some cities where there are, for instance, in Detroit, there are some areas of Detroit where there's a ton of houses that are right next to a highway. So they'll go in and they went in actually and put in all these sound and noise barriers between the highway and the houses, but that doesn't solve the whole thing. It'll decrease the din, but you're still hearing that road sound, the sound of the cars on the road. So what we did is we designed for the city of Detroit sort of a nature scape with what the local birds would be in Detroit in the trees, and maybe they should add more trees, but again, it sort of covers that din.
So Joel, you have created these urban soundscapes. Is that something you do regularly? Was that Detroit project a one-off?
Well, it definitely was a one-off. I don't think we get calls from cities every day of the week, but we took that thinking and brought it to this project in Dallas called Discovery District. It was for AT&T. And AT&T took over like a 2 square block area of downtown Dallas and looking to revitalize it the same way that Detroit was looking to revitalize some of the sections they had in their city. So in this 2 square block area, they created almost an adult theme park in some ways, but you didn't experience it that way. You really experienced it almost like its own unique environment, unlike any environment you'd find anywhere else. So on one side of a building, there was a 100-foot screen, and with all sorts of really cool, interesting visions that were essentially animations, everything from sort of supernatural kind of floating beings to looking at the side of the building, and like bits and pieces of the building would fold and unfold and become different buildings. If you stood in one spot, there was like an Easter egg where the whole place would light up. So the sound really was incredibly important in that particular exercise because we experience sound before we experience any other input from any other sense. So really, in a lot of ways, in multisensory environments, because we hear the sound first, that becomes the arbiter of all of our other senses. So either the visuals match up to what you're hearing or they don't. And if they don't, you could be really annoyed by it, or you could be, you get kind of like cognitive dissonance against it. So we really have to think about not just what we're doing sonically, but how it is marrying against all other sensory input. I used to do a lot of horror films. I'd score a lot of horror films.
No way.
And one of the, yeah, and like when I started my career and I had I was trying to get gigs, it was like these B or C horror movies. And what I learned was if you put the sound right on the scare, you blow the whole moment for like you wouldn't be scared because you experienced the sound first. I actually had to move the sound later. That was, I think, the first time I realized how important that was. And I've carried that through my career ever since.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you got into the industry and kind of what you were doing? Like what led you to, get into the industry? I know that you kind of had a connection to sound from a young age, but like, where did you start? And then talk a little bit about kind of how you got into this specific part of the industry.
Well, it really started was trying to convince my dad to pay for an education at NYU, one for me, in music. And what he said is, no, I won't do that. But if you do a music business double major, I will pay for that. So that's where I went. And who knew that the business part of this would really help me going down the line. But my first inclination, of course, was to be like a rock star, like everybody else studying music.
Yeah. Sometimes dads know things, apparently. Look at that.
In the long run.
And I'm a dad. I'd like to think that I know something, but not as much as my dad knows. But so when I got over my rock star fever, I realized, look, I love movies, I love television shows, and I started to score. I started to learn how to score at NYU. But of course, there's nothing like getting on the job training and trying to figure this stuff out and making directors happy and understanding their vision and hopefully making their vision even a little bit better. But at the beginning, I was kind of starving and I had like a family at home. So I got introduced, believe it or not, to my wife, who was in the promo world in television promotion. The idea of not just scoring film and television, but scoring promotional campaigns. And then all the things I learned about creating themes for film and television, I brought to I brought to the concept of creating themes for brands. So at first it was just entertainment brands. And that's where things like the HBO project came into being, and some work we did with Turner Classic Movies and for Showtime. And a lot of this stuff is still on the air decades later, which is really fun to see. And then that led into doing things with general market brands, which, like this AT&T project, which became really fun because it's like, oh, now it's this whole new medium, this whole new area that I'd never played in before.
So Joel, that career arc transition from being about entertainment into a focus on helping brands and being, kind of supporting the marketing role. And you've talked about, driving results at retail and things like that. How do you measure some of that stuff in the marketing world? Or how do the marketers you work with measure the impact of sound?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. Obviously, the easiest one is cash register, right? Feed something to an
Good
environment,
one.
and it changes the cash register one way or another. That tells you right there. But as we all know, marketing is probably a bit more art than science. Please don't tell our CMOs and our.
They'll
But
never believe it.
but we know that also if we can show that we've influenced consumer behavior, or at least how they feel about something, their impression of a brand, their emotional connection to some kind of communication, you can begin to glean from that the value and hopefully the multiple of value that you bring in each of these communications. A lot of times what I talk to people about is what we try to do is to create things that move people, that really leverages their media spend. So if you get the same value, let's say by doing half the media spend, that's amazing. If you get twice the value by doing the same media spend in terms of having people, changing people's impressions of your brand, I mean, that's gold. So that, to me, that's really kind of in terms of how we're serving our clients, that's one of the most important things. Obviously, elevating and lifting the brand perception is important just intrinsically. And the same thing what we're doing for audiences, which is people love brands. They love to love brands. And if we can create that kind of emotional stickiness in association with the brand, it's sort of like win-win. One thing that's really typical, obviously, for marketers is basically using groups of people in focus groups to figure out how they feel about, different advertising or whatever it is. The moment you do that with music and sound, like throw all the results out the window, because sound really, especially in marketing, and film scores and television scores, the moment that you're aware of it consciously and you're saying, oh, I like this, I don't like the music, it's like that's not the point. So you really have to do this subconscious testing, which is the implicit association testing, in which gives you a much better sense of people's subconscious reactions to things, because again, it's sound and music, it operates on this subconscious level. The other
Yeah.
thing we've been doing a lot with now, believe it or not, is eye tracking studies.
I was going to say, you must be some biometrics involved here.
Definitely using biometrics, and some of this stuff I think we're still learning where the
Mhm.
value is. But again, I think that the research portion of this is incredibly important.
Interesting. Joel, going to pivot to the inevitable question about AI. How has generative AI kind of come into your business? How often are you using it and how?
Generative AI, I think it's obviously still evolving. There's some applications of it that are incredible. There is a physical location where you have to think about, oh, well, it's not just the customers, it's also the people who are working in this space all the time. And one of the things that drive people crazy is play of 2 hours of music and then it repeats,
Oh,
and then
amen.
and then it repeats.
Yeah.
So one of the really great uses of AI, we created a whole, long piece of music with a lot of different elements. Okay, there could be a guitar element here. There could be snaps. There could be this. There could be this. There could be this. And we fed it into an AI generator for, basically generator for, Gen AI for music, and it created about 40 hours of music that you could listen to, and it felt different enough that it was like pleasant. And it just, there's like, okay, I think there were actually like 5 or 6 different pieces of music and tons of stems, which is all those different instrumentations. That is a really great use for AI, especially in sort of more spatially driven things. The stuff that's,
So just expanding on the thing, expanding on the human created elements
yes, and
for volume.
utilizing them kind of in a specific fashion based on the vocabulary that AI learns from that material. I would say, like, I know everybody's in the same boat here, but ethical AI is super important to us. We don't want systems that have been trained on music without permission.
Yeah.
So the systems that we're working with right now and still experimenting with are trained really just on the music that we've created for that particular project and other music that we own. So, the more data you put into these things, into these models, the better it is. But that's one of the things we're really trying to make sure that we've got it straight. The other thing we learned about, using AI is there always has to be a human touch in this. You can't just let the generative AI just do its thing, because it just, there are points of it just doesn't feel right. It definitely feels canned or mechanical. So it's a huge time saver, but we still need that human touch.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is going to keep getting better and better and better. The one thing I'm scared about is with AI is when I train and I was doing music for music libraries and other things, I wasn't writing great music. I was writing okay music when I first started out. And I think in our business, music that's created that's just okay, that's dead, because there's tons of AI. There's going to be tons of music created by AI that's going to be just okay. So my question is, how do we train the next generation of composers and producers when those okay applications, like, a bar song in the back of a scene of CSI where people used to make some coin as they were learning, like, okay, well, if AI is doing that, how are we going to grow our next crop of people? Which I'm sure
Interesting.
it's not just music. You guys experience the same thing?
Hadn't
Yeah.
thought of it in those terms, but that's really interesting. Yeah, how do you learn
Yeah.
if the machine is doing the basic stuff?
Wait, I mean, if everything can do okay work, how do you take your okay work and make it great? And because that's going to be the bar now. Joel, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. It was really interesting to connect on all this stuff. It's fascinating to think about all the stuff that kind of goes on that you might not always think about, and how it
Yeah.
kind of is as part of your experience. And
What an education. Really
yeah,
cool. I mean, we're also aware of the visual stuff in our lives, and we take the audio for granted. So this is really helpful to hear from your experience.
Well, thanks. It was really, really, really fun to talk to you guys about it. And it's always, it's the big marketing concepts and the big visual concepts that we find inspiring. And what we
Yeah.
try to do is add something to them and make them even better. So thank you guys for what you do. And because otherwise I wouldn't have any work. So
All right. Well, Joel, thanks again. You have a great day, and take care of yourself.
yeah,
John, that was a great interview. Really love talking about things that you might not be thinking about in marketing, and
Never think about, yeah.
yeah, never. And you just see how important that really is, and how that does really align as a strong piece in the brand toolkit.
Yeah. Well, and we'll share some links with some of the examples, because when you hear them, you're like, wow, I'm so aware of that. And it creates such a connection to a brand or a show that I wasn't fully aware of. But when you hear it and think about it, you're like, wow, yep, that's the thing I know. I will say there's one question I really wanted to ask, but I never got the nerve.
What's that?
I really wanted Joel to redo our Snap Decisions music, our intro and close
Oh my
music, because
God.
it makes me a little upset.
Maybe that's a 2025 goal, John.
Yeah, I don't know if we can afford him, but if he likes the podcast, maybe he'll do it for free.
Never know.
Reverse compensation for his appearance. All right. Well,
Write it down.
happy shopping, and to everybody, thanks for listening to a show about audio.
I like what you did there.
All right.
All right, let's shut it down.
Bye.
Bye.